see that the delegation went there with this maximalist agenda that they were putting on the table back in 2022 when Kyiv was encircled and Ukraine was in a much more dangerous and perilous military situation. Since then, let's recall also an interesting fact that in 3 years of war, Russia has conquered about 10% of Ukrainian territory as compared to what it had in 2022 before invasion, and has lost almost 800,000 men. So this war is not going to Putin's plan, but he doesn't seem to get it.
The Prime Minister says he and European allies have spoken to Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, and President Trump to begin closely aligning a response to what he called an unacceptable Russian position on peace talks. It comes after Russia and Ukraine failed to agree a ceasefire during their first direct peace talks for 3 years, and that happened in Turkey earlier today. The two countries did settle on a prisoner exchange of 1,000 people each, but Moscow says there'll need to be more talks before agreeing to a truce. Ukraine's Defense Minister Rustem Umerov has restated the call for a meeting between President Zelensky and Putin as the next step.
Our president was expecting the high-level discussions in here, and I think the next step would be that the leaders-level meeting should be organized, and that would be our next step. So at this stage, we once again would like to reiterate Ukraine wants peace. Ukraine is focused to people, and we're able and capable to continue fight. But at the end of the day, we need to finalize this war.
So that was Ukraine's Defense Minister Rustem Umerov. Well, Orysia Lutsevych is Deputy Director of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House. Orysia, welcome to the programme.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Yep. And now Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, and others said they weren't expecting much from this particular meeting. What do you think of what's emerged? The settlement of a prisoner exchange of 1,000 people each, but not really much more beside.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think if you look at the traditional conflict resolution theory, you would call this a confidence-building measures, that the sides decided to exchange prisoners. But let's remember that Ukraine and Russia has been exchanging prisoners throughout the 3 years of war. So this is not something unique. Perhaps the size is bigger. But beyond the point, let's recall why this whole thing was taking place. Because actually Trump, in a way, obstructed this united European, Ukraine, and even American position on unconditional ceasefire and let Putin play him again by changing the date, changing the format, and insisting on this meeting today, which I personally interpret as leading to almost nothing.
Almost nothing. What do you think the next step is? Because it's unclear from the Ukrainian side what the Russian demands were. We know thus far they've been maximalist. They want essentially almost an unconditional surrender from Ukraine, the ceding of territory, and the country to be demilitarized and never to join NATO. But that's what we know leading into this meeting. It's not clear what was said this time round.
So what we have from open sources that has been in the media is that Russians were again asking for Ukrainian armed forces to retreat without a fight and give them control of regions that they've annexed on paper by including them into the constitution, such as Kherson, Zaporizhia, and parts of Donetsk Oblast. And this is when the negotiations or these talks reached the deadlock. It was reported by a Turkish source. So we see that the delegation went there with this maximalist agenda that they were putting on the table back in 2022 when Kyiv was encircled and Ukraine was in a much more dangerous and perilous military situation. Since then, let's recall also an interesting fact that in 3 years of war, Russia has conquered about 10% of Ukrainian territory as compared to what it had in 2022 before invasion, and has lost almost 800,000 men. So this war is not going to Putin's plan, but he doesn't seem to get it.
Okay, well, what about Trump saying nothing's going to happen until I meet with Putin, and then we'll see movement. And Zelensky saying, well, I want to meet Putin face to face. What do you make of the dynamics there?
I think it's telling that these, leaders of superpowers like America, I think Trump himself thinks he has some omnipotent powers to compel Putin to do things that he doesn't want to. Putin has not shown a single step that would indicate that he wants to end the war. But Trump is obsessed because he made this electoral promise that he'll do it fast. And again, Trump and Putin has already spoken. They had a very long call on the 12th of February, and then Putin's very trusted envoy spent, I believe, 3 meetings, very long meetings in Moscow discussing with Putin. They should know by now what Putin wants, and what Putin wants, Ukraine cannot give him, or Europe for the same matter.
Right. And what about those leaders who gathered around President Zelensky in Albania today? What do you think emerged from there? Anything credible?
Well, I think Ukraine is trying to sustain the alliance and its supporters who are helping Ukraine to stay in the fight and defend. So all kinds of multilateral meetings are critical and important. What was also important in Istanbul was the meeting between Secretary Rubio and Ukrainian Foreign Minister Sybiha. I think the more direct contact there is between Ukrainians and Americans, the more there are chances that United States and the White House will pursue the policy of increasing pressure on Putin. This is also something that Prime Minister Starmer, Macron, and Chancellor Merz are trying to convince Trump. So all these meetings are heading in that direction. But whether Trump will take that decision or procrastinate further is still unknown.
What do you think they make of this in the Kremlin? They've kept on pushing and they haven't hit steel yet, but they must know that sooner or later even Trump, who thinks about his own dignity, his own profile a lot, will get to the point where he says, they're playing me, I have to do something about this, otherwise I'm going to go down in history as a guy who got suckered.
Well, let's also remember that Putin is a master manipulator. His formation was in the Russian security services. He's operative in the Kremlin, and he has some kind of a plan. He is considering that eventuality, and he is trying to kind of have something to lure Trump into his vision of the worldview, into the kind of a high superpower table. And that is perhaps not Ukraine. That could be something he promises United States on Iran, on China, trying to say, look, let me handle Europe on my own. This is a regional war. Ukraine is unreasonable. Let's make a bigger deal. So this is Putin's calculation, and so far we do not see that he's failing. Trump is not increasing any pressure. There are no sanctions. There's no new military package for Ukraine to support in its summer campaign, because all facts on the ground point Russians are preparing summer offensive campaign.
Right. And what of the Europeans? Again, back to them. I hear that the EU is likely to adopt a new round of measures, new sanctions, as soon as Tuesday, whatever the Americans think of that. What more could they do, sanctions-wise?
Well, I think sanctions are important, and this package includes more pressure on the Russian shadow fleet that is helping Russia to avoid sanctions and trade its oil. I think that's important to kind of limit income to Russia's budget. But I think honestly, what is more effective at this point is supporting Ukrainian armed forces to deny Putin any success on the battlefield. As I've described, and as UK, military intelligence points, Russians are losing momentum. Since the beginning of this year, their advance is stalling, it's moving slowly and more slowly. So what Ukraine needs is all the same stuff. It's artillery, it's air defense, it's actually convincing America either to provide Ukraine or to allow Europe to give its capabilities to Ukraine, like has happened with Germany when Chancellor Merz has given Ukrainian more Patriots and other American military equipment upon Trump's agreement. This is what we need, because this war, even if there is a pause for 30 days in hostilities, can restart any moment, and Russia only understands the language of capabilities. If they know that they cannot move forward, they will think twice before doing it.
All right. Let's see whether or not they'll get that in the White House sooner or later. Orysia Lutsevych, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And Orysia is Deputy Director of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House. It's Henry Bonsu on Times Radio.